You were never really family. That is what my mother-in-law said to me at her son's funeral, my husband's funeral. She didn't scream it. Margaret never screamed. She leaned in close so the people around us wouldn't hear, and she said it the way you might tell someone they had something on their coat, calm, almost kind. As if she were doing me a favor by finally saying out loud what she believed everyone already knew. We were standing near the casket. The church smelled like cold stone and too many lilies. Somewhere behind me, a woman was crying softly into a tissue, and the sound kept catching, over and over, like a record that couldn't move past one groove. David had been dead for 4 days, and his mother chose that moment, in front of his casket, to tell me I had never belonged to him. I didn't answer her. I want you to understand that. I didn't argue. I didn't cry harder. I didn't tell her she was wrong. I just looked at her, and I nodded, once, like I was accepting a small correction. And Margaret smiled. A thin, satisfied smile, because she thought my silence was surrender. She didn't know that 4 days earlier, I had already read the letter. She didn't know whose name was on the will. But maybe it's better if I start a little further back. Because if I only tell you about the funeral, you'll think this is a story about revenge, and it isn't. Not really. It's a story about a woman who spent 30 years believing her son belonged to her alone, and a man who, at the very end, quietly proved her wrong. My name is Diana. I met David when I was 31 years old, in the least romantic place imaginable. A hospital waiting room. My father was having heart surgery that afternoon. David's mother was 2 floors up, recovering from a hip replacement. We were both sitting in those hard plastic chairs, both holding paper cups of coffee we weren't drinking, both pretending to read the same terrible magazines. He was the one who spoke first. "That coffee is a war crime," he said. I looked up. He had kind eyes and a bad haircut and a tie that didn't match anything he was wearing. "It's free," I said. "That's the only reason it's allowed to exist." I laughed. It surprised me. I hadn't thought I could laugh that day. We talked for 3 hours, not about anything important, about the magazines, about the vending machine that ate his dollar, about whether the fish in the lobby tank were happy. When they told me my father had come through the surgery, I cried, and David, a man I had known for 3 hours, handed me a napkin and didn't say anything stupid. He just let me cry. That was David. He didn't fix things. He sat with you while they were broken. We were married 18 months later. I need to tell you what kind of man he was because it matters for everything that comes after. David was gentle in a way that men are usually taught not to be. He remembered the names of waiters. He cried at movies and didn't hide it. When we argued, he was the first to soften, always, even when he was right. He grew flowers on our balcony that never quite survived, and every spring he tried again anyway. He was, without exaggeration, the best person I have ever known, and he had exactly one blind spot. His mother. Margaret raised David alone. His father died when David was 6 years old, a heart attack, sudden, at the kitchen table on an ordinary Tuesday. Margaret was 34, with a small boy and a mortgage and no help from anyone, and she did it. She raised him. She worked 2 jobs. She sold her wedding ring 1 year to pay for his school things and never told him until he was grown. She went without so that he wouldn't have to. I want to be honest with you about Margaret because it would be easier to tell this story if she was simply a monster. She wasn't. She was a woman who had lost everything once and had built her entire life back out of one thing. One person. Her son. Everything she was, everything she had survived, all of it pointed at David like a single beam of light. And when you pour your whole self into one person for 30 years, something happens. The love stops being only love. It becomes ownership. It becomes a debt you expect to be repaid in loyalty. To Margaret, no woman was ever going to be enough for David, because no woman could give back what she had given. I understood that. Even at the beginning, I understood it. I tried, for years, to be patient with it. The first time I met her, David took me to her house for Sunday dinner. She had cooked for hours. The table was beautiful, and she spent the entire meal telling stories about David and his old girlfriend from before he met me. How lovely she was, how close they had been. How sad it was that it hadn't worked out. She said the girl's name 11 times. I counted. When we left, David held my hand in the car and said, "She'll come around. She just needs time." She needed 22 years. She never came around. I'm not going to tell you every small cruelty. There were too many, and most of them were the kind that sound like nothing when you say them out loud. The Christmas gifts always a little cheaper than the ones she gave David's cousins. The way she introduced me to her friends as David's wife, never by my name. The birthday she forgot on purpose and then acted wounded when I mentioned it. The way, at our wedding, she wore black, not gray, not navy, black, a full black dress and a small black hat, and when someone asked her about it, she said, "I'm in mourning for the son I'm losing." At the wedding, out loud, where I could hear. David laughed it off. He was good at laughing things off. It was his way of surviving her, but I kept a record, not on paper, not then, just in me. A quiet, careful list of every time she reminded me that I was a guest in the family, never remember. I have always been the kind of person who keeps things. Receipts, letters, the warranty for the toaster. David used to tease me about it. He said I remembered things the way other people save money. I didn't know then that this small habit, this careful attention, would one day be the only thing standing between me and a woman who wanted to erase me completely. But we'll get to that. For 20 years, David and I built a good life in the narrow space Margaret allowed us. We had our apartment, our jobs, our friends, our slow Sunday mornings. We didn't have children. We tried for a while, and then we stopped trying, and we made peace with it in the quiet way you make peace with things you can't change. David was my family. He was all the family I needed. And then, 3 years ago, he started getting tired. At first we thought it was nothing. He was 54. People get tired. Then he lost his appetite. Then he lost weight he didn't have to lose. Then, one morning, he sat down on the edge of the bed to put on his socks and couldn't get back up without holding the wall. The word, when it finally came, was pancreatic. You probably know what that word means, even if you don't want to. I knew too. I saw it on the doctor's face before he said it. There's a particular way a doctor looks at you when the news is not the kind you recover from, a softness that is worse than any harsh word. David squeezed my hand under the desk. His hand was steady. Mine was not. We were told, gently, that we should think in terms of months, not years. I remember driving home from that appointment. I remember the light was very ordinary. Gray sky, wet road, the wipers going back and forth. I remember thinking how strange it was that the world hadn't stopped, that people were still buying groceries and complaining about traffic while my whole life quietly caught fire in the passenger seat. David spoke first. He always did. "Okay," he said, "just that, okay?" I said. "I mean, it's not okay, obviously." He gave a small, tired laugh. "But we're going to be okay, you and me. I need to make sure of that." I didn't understand yet what he meant. I thought he was comforting me. He wasn't only comforting me, he was already planning, because David knew something I was still too heartbroken to think about. He knew his mother. Margaret came the day after the diagnosis. She arrived with a suitcase. She didn't ask. She simply appeared at our door with a suitcase and a look on her face that said she had come to reclaim what was hers. "I'll take care of him," she announced, walking past me into the apartment. A wife panics. A mother knows what to do. For the first few weeks, I told myself she was grieving too. That was true. She was. Whatever else Margaret was, she was a mother watching her only child die, and there is no crueler thing in the world. So I let her in. I made space. I told myself we were on the same side, but grief takes people in different directions. Mine made me want to hold on to every remaining minute with David. Hers made her want to take control of everything. She rearranged our kitchen. She changed his appointments without telling me. She spoke to the doctors as if I weren't in the room, and when they addressed me, she answered for me. And slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice, she began to talk about arrangements. Not funeral arrangements, not yet. Money. "We need to think about the house," she would say, while David slept in the next room. "About what happens. It should stay in the family, in the blood. You understand? The blood." She used that phrase like a small knife. In the blood. As if David's blood ran only backward, to her, and not forward, to me. She started bringing papers. She brought Gerald. Gerald was the family lawyer. He had done Margaret's affairs for 30 years. An old man with a soft voice and cold eyes who called me dear, in a way that made my skin tighten. He would come in the afternoons when David was weakest, when the pain medication made him foggy and pliable, and he would spread papers across the bed and say gently that these were just things to sign. Formalities? To make everything simple. To protect the family. And Margaret would stand at the foot of the bed with her arms folded, watching, guiding David's hand toward the line. I want you to picture it. A dying man, exhausted, drugged against the pain, and his mother and her lawyer at his bedside with a pen, telling him where to sign. I was not a lawyer. I want to be clear about that. I didn't have some special knowledge. I couldn't have told you the difference between one legal document and another. But I am the kind of person who keeps things, who pays attention, who notices when something is wrong even when she can't name it, and I noticed. I noticed that these visits always happened when David was too tired to read. I noticed that Margaret positioned herself so I couldn't see the pages. I noticed the way Gerald slid one document under another before David could finish looking. I noticed that a woman who claimed to want nothing was suddenly very interested in signatures. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I started keeping things, the dates of the visits, what was said. Which afternoons David couldn't have read a menu, let alone a contract. I wrote it all down, quietly, in a small notebook I kept in my bag. And one afternoon when Margaret didn't know the door was open, I heard her on the phone in the hallway. I heard her say, "Once it's done, the wife gets nothing." She was never really one of us. She was never really one of us. I stood very still in that hallway, and something in me, which had been patient for 22 years, went quiet and cold and clear. I didn't confront her. I want you to understand why. It wasn't fear, it was strategy. If I confronted Margaret, she would move faster. She would finish whatever she was doing. She would win before I even understood the game, so I said nothing. I went back into the bedroom, and I sat beside my husband, and I waited until Gerald and Margaret had gone. And then, when David woke and his mind was clear in the evening the way it sometimes was, I told him everything I had seen. I will remember his face for the rest of my life. He wasn't surprised. That was the worst part. He wasn't surprised at all. He closed his eyes for a long moment, and when he opened them, there were tears in them, but not from fear, from something more like grief. The grief of a son who has finally, completely understood his mother. "I hoped she wouldn't," he said quietly. "Even now, I hoped." Then he took my hand. "Diana, listen to me. I need you to help me do something. And I need you to do exactly as I say." David had already, weeks earlier, quietly done the one thing his mother never imagined he would do. He had gone to another lawyer. Not Gerald, not the family's man, a lawyer neither Margaret nor Gerald had ever heard of. A woman named Ruth Alderman, whose office was across the city, whom David had found himself and visited on a day he told his mother he had a scan. And with her, weeks before, on a day when his mind was sharp and clear, David had written a new will, a real one. He had it dated, he had it witnessed. And because David knew his mother better than anyone alive, he had done one more thing. He had asked his doctor to examine him that same day and to write, formally, that David was of completely sound mind, lucid, competent, making his own decisions. Because David knew that when the truth came out, Margaret would say the only thing she could say. She would say I had manipulated him, that he wasn't in his right mind, that a dying man had been tricked by a scheming wife. David built a wall against that lie before she could even tell it. Everything he had. The savings, the investments, the apartment, and the house. His childhood home, the one Margaret had lost to the bank years ago, the one David had quietly bought back and never told her, planning to surprise her with it someday. All of it, to me, his wife, his family. The whole new will sealed in Ruth Alderman's office, waiting. And the papers Margaret was pushing under his hand at the bedside? The ones she thought were rewriting everything in her favor? They were nothing. Older documents. Things already replaced by what David and Ruth had done. David signed them anyway, when Margaret pushed, because he wanted her to believe she had won. He wanted her calm. He wanted her to stop and let him die in peace and think it was already settled. It was settled. Just not the way she thought. "When it's over," David told me that night, his voice barely above the sound of the machines, "you don't fight her. You don't argue with her. You let Ruth do it. You just be there, and you read the letter." "What letter?" He smiled, the old smile, the one from the hospital waiting room 22 years earlier. "You'll know. Before we go on, if this story is pulling you in, take a second to subscribe. It's the only way to know when the next one goes up. And if a betrayal like this has ever happened to someone you know, tell me in the comments. I read them. Now let me tell you what happened next. David died on a Thursday morning, just before dawn. I was holding his hand. The room was very quiet. The machines had been turned off 2 days before at his request. There was only the sound of the city beginning to wake outside the window, a garbage truck somewhere far away, a bird that didn't know or care what was happening in that room. His breathing got slower, and then it stopped. And the world, which had refused to stop that day in the car 3 years earlier, finally did. For one long moment, everything was still. I want to tell you, I said something beautiful. I didn't. I just held his hand and I said his name quietly, a few times, the way you call to someone in another room. Margaret was not there. She had gone home the night before to rest. When I called her at 5 in the morning to tell her that her son was gone, there was a silence on the line, a long one. And then she said, "I'll handle everything." Not, "Are you all right?" Not, "I'm coming, I'll handle everything." And she did. In the 4 days between David's death and the funeral, Margaret took control of all of it, exactly the way she had taken control of his illness. She chose the church. She chose the casket. She wrote the notice for the paper and left my name out of it entirely. She listed herself as his only surviving family. His only surviving family. 22 years of marriage, and I had been erased in a single line of newsprint. Her friends and relatives began to arrive, and Margaret received them like a queen receiving her court. She accepted their condolences. She organized the food. She stood at the center of every room. And me, she moved to the edges. When people came to me to say they were sorry, Margaret would appear, take them gently by the arm and steer them away, murmuring something I couldn't hear. And they would glance back at me with a strange, uncertain look. The look people give you when they've been told a story about you. I know what she was telling them, that I had married David for his money, that I had turned him against his mother at the end, that the will, when it was read, would show the truth of who really mattered. She was so sure. She was so completely, absolutely sure. And I let her be. Because I had read the letter. I want to be honest with you about how hard that was. To stand in that funeral home being whispered about, being pushed aside, being erased, while I held inside me the one thing that would end all of it. There were moments I wanted to say it, to stand up and tell them all, to wipe that certainty off Margaret's face. But David had asked me not to. You don't fight her. You let Ruth do it. You just be there. So I was there. I held my grief and I held my silence, and I let a woman who despised me believe she had already won. That is not weakness. I need you to understand that. The hardest thing I have ever done was to stay quiet when I had every right to scream. Which brings me back to the funeral, to the casket, to the lilies and the cold stone and the woman crying somewhere behind me, to Margaret leaning in close, calm, and almost kind, to tell me I was never really family. I nodded. She smiled her thin, satisfied smile, and she turned back to her guests, certain she had put me in my place at last. And I looked at the casket, at David, and I thought, only 3 more days, because the will was to be read the following Monday. At Margaret's insistence, actually. She had scheduled it. She wanted it done quickly. She was so eager to see me humiliated one final time, so eager to watch the intruder be legally cast out, that she rushed the very thing that would destroy her. She told everyone to come, the whole family. The aunts, the cousins, the old friends who had spent the week being told what a schemer I was. She wanted an audience. She wanted witnesses. She was going to get them. The reading was held in a conference room downtown, not Gerald's office, because it was not Gerald reading the will. That was the first crack in Margaret's certainty, and I watched it happen in real time. We were all seated around a long table. Margaret at the head, of course, where she had placed herself. Her sister beside her. The cousins, the family friends. Perhaps 15 people, all of them there, I understood, to see me lose. I sat near the far end, alone. And at 9 o'clock exactly, the door opened and a woman none of them recognized walked in. Ruth Alderman. Gray suit, a leather folder under her arm. Calm, unhurried, entirely unbothered by the room full of strangers staring at her. Margaret frowned. "I'm sorry," she said. "Where is Gerald? Gerald handles our family's affairs." Ruth set her folder on the table. "Mr. Ellison handled some of your family's affairs," she said pleasantly. "He did not handle your son's." "I did. My name is Ruth Alderman. David retained me 11 weeks before his death." The room went very quiet. Margaret's frown deepened, but she recovered quickly. She was good at that. "Well," she said, "I'm sure there's some confusion. My son and I put his affairs in order together. Gerald has all the paperwork. I signed as witness myself." "I'm aware of those documents," Ruth said. "They were superseded. Your son executed a new will after them. Dated, witnessed, and accompanied by a physician's assessment of his mental capacity, performed the same day. The word capacity landed in the room like a stone in still water. I watched it reach Margaret. I watched her understand, just for a second, what it meant. That someone had anticipated her, that the accusation she was holding in reserve, the one about the scheming wife and the confused dying man, had been answered before she could even make it. Her hand tightened on the table. "Read it then," she said. Her voice had changed. Something underneath it had gone thin. "Read it, and let's stop wasting everyone's time." Ruth opened the folder. She read the will in a clear, even voice. I won't give you all of it. The language of wills is dry and slow, full of phrases meant to leave no room for argument. But I will give you the part that mattered. Ruth read that David, being of sound and disposing mind, revoked all prior wills and codicils. She read that he left the entirety of his estate, without exception, to his wife, to me, the apartment, the savings, the investments, and the house, his childhood home, the one Margaret had lost and grieved for years, the one David had quietly bought back and never told her, the one thing in the world she wanted most. To me, there was no bequest to his mother, not out of cruelty. I'll tell you what he did, leave her, in a moment, because he did leave her something, and it was the most David thing he ever did. But the estate, the money, the house, the blood inheritance Margaret had schemed for at her son's deathbed, all of it, went to the woman she had spent 22 years telling was never one of them. For a moment no one spoke. And then Margaret laughed. It was an ugly sound, high and disbelieving. That's not possible, she said. He wasn't well. She got to him. She poisoned him against me at the end, when he couldn't think straight. This will is a fraud. I'll contest it. Gerald will. You're welcome to contest it, Ruth said calmly. You should know what you'd be contesting. The will was witnessed by two people with no connection to Mrs. Alderman's family. It is accompanied by a signed, dated assessment from David's treating physician confirming that on the day of signing he was fully lucid and competent. And, Ruth paused. She looked, for the first time, at me. And there is a letter, which David asked to be read aloud, in this room, in front of everyone present. She took a single folded page from the folder. She held it out to me. He asked that his wife read it. My hands did not shake when I took it. I had thought they would. For 4 days I had carried the fact of this letter inside me, and I had imagined this moment, and in every version of it my hands shook. But when the moment came, they were steady, because this was the last thing David would ever ask of me, and I was not going to be trembling when I did it. I unfolded the page. It was in his handwriting, his real handwriting, from before the illness took the strength from his hands. He must have written it early and kept it and given it to Ruth. I looked at the room, at the aunts and the cousins and the friends who had spent a week believing I was a thief, at Margaret at the head of the table, her face gone pale and rigid, and I read. If this is being read, then I'm gone, and my mother is in the room, and she is angry. Mom, I need you to hear this from me, even now. I loved you. You gave up everything for me, and I know it, and I carried it my whole life. Nothing I ever did felt like enough to pay you back because you didn't want to be paid back. You wanted to keep me. But I was not yours to keep. Diana was my family, not instead of you. But she was the family I chose, the way you chose, Dad. She loved me quietly and completely and asked for nothing for 22 years, while you made her feel like a guest in my life. I saw all of it, Mom. Every wedding you wore black to, every name you refused to learn. I saw it, and I was a coward, because I loved you and I didn't want to lose you, so I let you hurt her, and I called it keeping the peace. This is me, finally, not being a coward. Everything I have goes to Diana, because she is my wife, and a wife is family, and I am done pretending you don't know that. I'm not leaving you the house to punish you. I'm not leaving you the money because you don't need it and you never wanted it for yourself anyway. You wanted it so she wouldn't have it, and I won't help you do that. But I am leaving you one thing, Dad's watch. It's in the box in my study, the one Diana knows. It was never really mine to give away. It was always yours. It's the only thing I have that was his, and it belongs with you. If you want it, you'll have to ask her for it. I know exactly what I'm asking of you both by doing it this way. I'm asking you, Mom, to finally treat her like a person. And I'm asking you, Diana, to be kinder to her than she was to you. Not because she's earned it, because you're better than that, and I know it, and it's the last thing I get to be proud of. I love you both. I'm sorry I waited until I was gone to be brave. David. When I finished, the room was silent. The kind of silence that has weight, that presses on your ears. I folded the letter carefully along its lines and set it on the table in front of me. I did not look triumphant. I want you to know that. There was no part of me that felt like I had won something. I had just read my dead husband's voice out loud to a room full of people who had judged me, and there is no victory in that. There is only the sound of his words in your mouth and the ache of knowing you will never hear them in his. I looked at Margaret. She was not looking at me. She was staring at the letter on the table, at David's handwriting, and her face had come apart in a way I had never seen. All the certainty, all the control, all the thin, cold armor of 22 years, gone. because it wasn't Ruth who had beaten her. It wasn't the will or the doctor's assessment or the money. It was her son. Her son had seen her completely and had loved her anyway and had still said no. There is no lawyer in the world who can defend you against that. She did not contest the will. Her relatives, the ones who had come to watch me fall, filed out of that room quietly, unable to look at either of us. The story they had been told all week had just been rewritten in front of them, in the dead man's own hand, and they knew it. Within a week the estate was settled. I did not gloat. I did not call anyone. I did not correct the record with the people who had believed Margaret's version of me. I let them wonder. Their opinions had never been mine to manage. I moved, eventually, into the house, David's childhood home, the one he had bought back in secret. It was strange, at first, to live inside a place that held so much of a child I had never met, his pencil marks on a doorframe, measuring his own height year by year, a boy who would grow up to hand a crying stranger a napkin in a hospital waiting room. I planted flowers on the back step, the kind David could never keep alive. Mine survived. I don't know what that means, maybe nothing, but it felt like something, and for 4 months I did not hear from Margaret at all. She came in the spring. I was in the garden when I heard the gate. I looked up, and there she was, standing at the edge of the path in a gray coat, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. Margaret had always seemed large to me, not in size, in presence. She filled rooms, she organized funerals. She erased daughters-in-law with a single line of newsprint. The woman at my gate was none of those things. She was 78 years old, and she had lost her only son, and she had nothing left to organize. We looked at each other across the garden for a long moment. Then she said, in a voice I barely recognized, "I've come about the watch." Of course she had. I knew she would. David knew she would. That was the whole cruel, gentle genius of it. He had made the one thing she wanted most, the last piece of her dead husband, into something she could only get by coming here, to me, to the woman she said was never family, and asking. I could have made her beg for it. I want to be honest with you. Some part of me wanted to. Some small, tired, human part of me that had worn black at no funeral, that had been erased and whispered about and told I did not belong, wanted to watch her stand at my gate and ask. But I thought about David. Be kinder to her than she was to you, not because she's earned it, because you're better than that. The last thing he got to be proud of. So I set down my trowel and I wiped my hands on my jeans and I said, "Come inside, Margaret. I'll make tea. It's in his study." "I'll get it for you." She stood there for a moment, unsure. She had come armored for a fight. She had, I think, prepared herself to be refused, to be humiliated, to finally play the wronged mother against the cruel wife. I had given her nothing to push against. She followed me into the house, her son's house. She walked slowly through the rooms, and I watched her see them. The door frame with the pencil marks. She stopped at that one. She put her fingers against the lowest mark, the one that said his name and the number 6 from the year his father died. She made a sound I will not try to describe. I went to the study and got the box. David's father's watch, heavy and old, the gold worn soft at the edges from another man's wrist, decades ago. I brought it to her. And I did the thing David asked of me. I didn't hand it to her like a debt being paid. I didn't make her thank me. I put it into her hands, gently, and I closed her fingers around it, and I said, "He wanted you to have this. He wanted you to have it from me. I think that mattered to him more than the watch did." Margaret looked down at it. And then this woman, this proud, cold, unbreakable woman who had spent 22 years making sure I knew I was nothing to her, began to cry. Not delicately, not for show. She cried the way David cried at movies, the way I cried in that hospital waiting room, the way people cry when the thing they've been holding up finally sets itself down. "I'm sorry," she said, into her hands. Barely a whisper. I don't know if she was saying it to me, or to David, or to her husband, or to herself. Maybe all of them. I didn't ask. We drank tea in her son's kitchen. We didn't say much. There wasn't much to say, and both of us knew it, and for once she let the silence be. Before she left, at the door she stopped. She looked at me, really looked at me, the way she never had in 22 years. She didn't apologize again. She didn't take back the black dress, or the newspaper notice, or the whisper in the hallway. She just said my name, Diana, the first time she had ever used it, and then she went. We were never close after that. I won't lie to you and give you a tidy ending where the two of us become the family David wanted. We didn't. Some wounds are too old to heal into friendship, but we spoke, sometimes, on his birthday, on the anniversary. Small, careful conversations, two women connected by the same grief and the same man. She called me by my name every time. It wasn't love, but it was recognition. And after 22 years of being made invisible, I found that recognition was enough. Margaret died 2 years later, peacefully in her sleep. In her will, she left one thing to me, the watch. I've told you this whole story, and I want to be honest with you about why. It isn't so you'll think I'm strong. I wasn't, most of the time. I was heartbroken and frightened, and I held a terrible secret through a funeral because a dying man asked me to. And it isn't about revenge. If it were about revenge, I would have read that will out loud with joy. I didn't. I read it with grief. Winning felt like nothing because the only prize I wanted was the man in the casket, and no will could give him back. I've told you because of one word, family. Margaret spent her whole life believing family was blood, that it was the debt of what you sacrificed for someone and the right to keep them because of it. She stood at her son's casket and used that word like a wall to shut me out, and David spent his last strength proving her wrong. Family isn't who has a claim on you, it's who chooses you, quietly, completely, for no reason and no reward. It's the stranger with the napkin, the wife who keeps every receipt, the husband who, dying, builds you a shelter out of a letter so that no one can ever tell you again that you don't belong. If someone in your life has ever made you feel like a guest where you should be family, I want you to hear this. You know the truth of who chose you. You know it in the quiet, careful record you keep inside yourself, the one no one else can see. And someday, in the strangest room, at the worst possible moment, that truth is going to stand up and speak in a voice you love, and you won't have to say a word. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this story moved you, leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss the one still coming. And tell me, what would you like the next story to be about? I'll be reading you in the comments.